National parks are beautiful places. Towering forests, hidden waterfalls, wildlife untouched by civilization. But there are parts of the wilderness that maps don't show. After a young couple is found dead, the town demands answers. They think a bear is responsible. The ranger knows better. So dim the lights and get comfortable for another creepy story. I stood outside my post and watched the last of the protesters file towards their cars scattered on the side of the road. After the parking lot had filled, people began parking anywhere they could fit. I felt the fading warmth of the sun as it fell further behind the horizon. Those left had been the most passionate and yelled the loudest for the execution they were all demanding. Blood for blood. They were like beasts smelling the scent of blood in the evening air, frothing at the mouth while they claw at the gates. The last man to leave got in his car and glared at me as he drove away. Sighing in relief, I locked the gates and attended to the rest of my duties before leaving the park for the night. That had been the girl's father. I remember thinking it was odd he came alone today. The same girl who, along with her boyfriend, had gotten lost in the forest. That morning they told me they planned to take photos of the park's wildlife. I think I even joked they shouldn't get too close and to use Theer camera zoom from a safe distance. The boy had a fancy modern camera tied around his neck. They found it covered in blood a few meters from Theer bodies. There had been photos of birds, a few larger fish in the lake at the foot of one of the park's waterfall, and the last photos were off bear cubs. The girl was petting them in one of the photos. In the background of a few of these, there was a larger figure moving through the trees. I had only been shown the photos in hopes of confirming what animal it was. I told them it was a bear, most likely the mother bear, and they believed me. So did the whole town. I was shook from my thoughts as I heard the sounds of something large moving in the woods out of sight. My eyes scanned the tree line in the sunlight, and I saw a large wolf limp into view. It stood nearly as tall as I did, and underneath its fur I could see its muscles pulled taut with every step. I had been feeding him over the last few weeks. I decided to call him Baxter. His left hind leg had been injured and didn't seem able to hold his weight. Anytime I've tried to get close enough to see the wound, Baxter bares his fangs and growls, a low hum that shakes the air between us. I tried again today, being met with the same warning, so I tossed a hunk of deer meat at him and hoped he would recover enough strength to hunt soon before he forgot how. However, I knew if I left him alone he would starve or worse. After what happened to that couple last month, the park couldn't risk another attack. After Baxter had eaten and disappeared back through the trees, the sun had nearly set. It was time for me to go home. I scanned the parking lot ahead of me. I could see my rusted pickup sitting in what should have been an otherwise empty car park. However, in the far corner behind a patch of bush, a white sedan was parked that I didn't recognize. There was no driver in sight. I cursed under my breath and ran back to my cabin, grabbing a bag of supplies. Inside were a spare torch, a first aid kit, a few bottles of water, and some energy bars. I continued running along the edge of the tree line looking for any signs someone had passed through. A few minutes later, I found a stamped-down section of tall grass leading into the forest. Following the trail, I found a branch torn from a tree trunk and tossed to the side, and a few paces further I saw a trail of footprints in the mud. Judging by the size and depth, I was probably looking for a heavy-set man or one that was very tall. The left footprint was pressed further into the mud, meaning the man was carrying something heavy over his shoulder, such as a rifle, I thought to myself. The sunlight was all but gone now, and I had to slow down to an agonizing pace as I followed the man's trail by torchlight. I dreaded hearing the sound of a gunshot. I'd spent a month keeping the town's folk from charging into the woods and shooting whatever they could find in the name of revenge. I followed the man's trail uphill. As my calves started to burn, I cursed him for not choosing to walk through the valley. The trees on my left side slowly gave way to a rocky decline as I walked further on. In the dusk light, I could make out the vague features of the forest below me. A river ran alongside the steep cliff face I stood atop. Opposite me and further down, there was a narrow shore with a few figures drinking from the riverside. I saw the silhouette of a mother bear and her 3 cubs. From the trees another, larger bear emerged. It took a few shaking stops towards the others before they noticed the new arrival. Once they did, the cubs sprinted towards the tree line and scaled the trees to hide within the branches. The mother bear being too heavy to climb the tree sprints away. The larger silhouette was left alone on the shore. Its head turned in my direction and looked up at me. The creature's figure begins to shift. It starts changing size, its massive form shuddering as limbs shrink and pop out of place before the joints can follow suit and shrink to hold them. Soon, it was no larger than the bear cubs that had fled a few minutes prior. It turned away from me and walked towards one of the trees and began climbing. The sounds of screaming soon filled the valley below, and I continued on my search at a hastened pace. By the time the sun had fully set and I was walking in total dark, I heard the sounds of running water. As I got closer, it grew louder into the crashing sound of water falling off the top of a cliff and onto the sharp rocks below. The moonlight reflected on the falling water and brief glimpses of orange scales hoping out the stream and climbing higher could be seen. The water pooled in a small lake at the base of the cliff face. Sitting beside this lake, I found who I had been looking for. I walked over and sat beside him. He glanced at me as I did so. I recognized him. He returned his gaze to the waterfall. "Do they ever make it to the top?" he asked without looking back at me. I told him they did. They're called freshwater divers. Every year, around June, they swim to the top and lay their eggs in a pool up there. Not many survive the trip back down in old age. He nodded his head and leaned in closer, as if to study the falls more closely. "How do they swim up the waterfall?" he asked while inspecting the dark waters. I told him I didn't know. "There are some unusual species of animal at the park." I paused and then added, "It's why I am so against the recent protests." He turned to look at me after I said this. "It wasn't a normal animal that killed my boy, was it?" He was more clever than I thought. I never answered his question. I sighed loudly and got to my feet. Looking down at him, I said, "It's time to leave. It's hard for us to see where we are going in the dark." We made eye contact. For a moment I thought he would push the mater further, but instead he nodded his head again and stood up with a loud sigh. He slung a rifle over his shoulder that had been lying to his side, obscured in the tall grass. He gestured forward with his palm as if to say, "Lead the way." The return path was downhill and equally as agonizingly slow. I glanced over my shoulder, often to ensure the rifle stayed slung over the man's shoulder, suddenly aware no one else knew I was out here. As we walked, we could only see a narrow cone in front of us that my torch illuminated. I thought I saw a brief reflection of light in the eyes of an animal just out of view. After a while, we were back to the foot of the mountain and less than a mile from the entrance. Continuing on even ground now, the trees began to thin out, and I thought to myself that I might get him out of the park safe. Behind me, I hear the man call out in a worried voice, "What is that?" I freeze in place. I couldn't see anything and swung my light around the surrounding tree trunks. "Don't take your light off it," he screamed. "Look in the bushes to your right." I swung my light to the right and held it low to the ground. In the torch light, I could tell something was crouching in the bush. Brown hair could be seen through the foliage, and I saw its eyes looking right in direction of the light. I heard a scuffle behind me, soon followed by the soft click, as the man cocked his rifle. "Put the gun down, it won't be enough to hurt it." I heard my own voice echo in now silent forest. I hadn't spoke, the sound instead having come from the bushes in my spotlight. There was a gunshot. My ears rung as the deafening sound almost covered the sharp splintering of wood immediately following. I dropped my torch. I squeezed my eyes shut. I crouched down and pulled my knees to my chest and repeated something I had been told to myself, and only spoke louder as the man began to scream and beg for help. I work for the park, he's not supposed to hurt me. I work for the park, he's not supposed to hurt me. I work for the park, he's not supposed to hurt me. Soon the forest went quiet. The only sounds that remained were the wind and me quietly mumbling to myself. I heard the sound of something walk up in front of me. I could hear its slow, measured breaths. Opening my eyes, I saw Baxter. Blood was dripping from his snout that was now inches from my face. From deep in the throat of the animal, I heard a strange gargled sound that slowly became more legible. Soon, I was listening to my own voice repeat the same phrase I had been repeating to myself moments prior. I work for the park, he's not supposed to hurt me. I work for the park, he's not supposed to hurt me. I work. The creature snapped its fangs open and shut, dropping still warm drops of blood onto my face. I screamed. It laughed, sounding like my own laugh, and slowly turned and walked away. I scrambled to my feet once it was a few meters from me. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs were rooted in place. It was nearly out of sight now, and I took a half step forward and called out to it. If they find his body, more men will come looking for whatever killed him, with more guns. It stopped walking. I finally turned and ran. It didn't catch up to me, or more likely never followed me in the first place, although I doubted I'd know if it did. The next morning I reported a car abandoned on park property, a white sedan. After a brief investigation, police determined that 53-year-old Stephen Harris had been missing since the previous morning. His last known whereabouts were a protest being held outside of the local national park, having started these protests with the father of his recently deceased daughter-in-law. After several weeks of searching, his body was never found. The only item recovered that belonged to the man were his car keys. They had been found with the keyring hooked around a tree branch 20 meters off the ground. Each night Baxter still appears on the edge of the trees. He no longer limps, and I don't try to get close to see if he needs help any longer. I feed him twice as much, sometimes even 3 times as before. I'm no longer worried if my actions lead him to forgetting how to hunt. If you enjoyed tonight's story, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Would you have taken the rifle into those woods? Or would you have stayed far away from the tree line after dark? Until next time, stay on the trail, listen to the warning signs, and turn